I would like to welcome you all to this special session on reducing avoidable baby and women's death through improved rights and ecosystem for breastfeeding. This is our third session in this special webinar series on women's stories of survival, innovation, resilience, and development. This session has been jointly organized by the Bringing Research for International Development and Global Equity Bridge Network, Auckland University of Technology, and Avoidable Deaths Network. I am just a brief introduction about myself. I am Dr. Nimra Chaudhary. I am with ADN as a knowledge exchange public engagement coordinator. I am an MBBS doctor from the Dow University of Health Sciences in Pakistan, and currently I am a master's in public health candidate at AUT, Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand. As with all the previous sessions, we have a few housekeeping rules. We would like to ensure that your microphones remain muted during the entire special session. If you have any questions or comments, please type it into the chat box. The special session is being recorded. If you do not wish to be seen, please turn off your cameras. Each section of this session will be timed. This session comprises of 2 hours. This is the timetable for your information of how we will be running this event. So on behalf of ADN, I would again like to welcome you all, and we hope that we have a very enjoyable and knowledgeable session. So now I would like Dr. Sari to introduce the Bridge Network. And I just a brief introduction about Dr. Sari. I would stop sharing my screen now. Dr. Sari Andjani is the co-founder of the Bridge Network. She is dedicated to fostering connections and inspiring transformative change for a better world. She is an associate professor at the Department of Public Health, Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand. Over to you, Dr. Sari.
Thank you. Could you please share my slide, please?
Yeah, I'll share your screen.
I can see familiar names here. Thank you so much. Selamat sore. Good afternoon for our colleagues in Indonesia. I will not take too long. I mean, we just want to introduce the Bridge Network, and Bridge stands for Bringing Research for International Development and Global Equity. So it's about 3 years old. And basically, this is what we are doing. We want to connect around the globe. It's a creative and safe space. So we bring, speakers like the 3 speakers today with their creative and innovation in looking into measuring mother's milk and how we can improve equity health for all. And we would like to enable conversation that raise awareness of global equity in equity issues and inspire action toward the common good. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. Is that the next one, Nimra? Should I introduce Julie now?
Just before this, the talks, we will have the poll, the pre-session poll. Lauren, would you start the poll? Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sari.
Lauren, are you there?
Yes. So we've got 78% participation. If everyone could just, now it's up to 81, just a couple more people.
Oh, yes, I can see now. Sorry for being late.
Okay.
It's just the interview went a bit long.
Hello,
Can
Dr.
you-
Nivedita. So we have you next after the poll, all right?
Okay, I'm so sorry, everybody. I think
No,
it's a
no
good
problem.
number, 90%.
You
Okay.
want me to share your slides for you?
Yes, please.
Yes,
If
please.
the poll is done, then we can.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's a neck in neck, isn't it? Yes, 41%, a little 41%. We shall see whether this number changes after the session. So I think, Lauren, it's not moving. I think 86 is a very good number. Very good, healthy number, I think. It's a good response. Do you want to close the poll? Or would you like to continue?
Yes, the
Give
poll
them-
is closed. We can continue now.
Okay. Can share my slide.
All right. So we have Dr. Nivedita here. Dr. Nivedita is Associate Professor in Risk Management based at the University of Leicester School of Business. She is a social scientist specializing in disaster risk reduction, and she is the founder of Avoidable Deaths Network. So over to you, Dr. Nivedita. I will be sharing your screen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I'm so sorry. I've had to attend an interview for a PhD and there were technical challenges. These are international people, so we just ran a little bit over time. So I'm really sorry for that. So thanks for your patience and waiting. So I'll take only about 5 minutes or so and then we can move on. And I'm sorry, my dog has just decided to join me, so you can hear him barking. But okay, so let's move on. My name is Nivedita Ray Bennett, and Nimra has very kindly introduced me, so I shan't introduce myself anymore. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. The next slide, please. It's got hung up, I think. Nimra, are you there?
Yeah, can you see it now? Change the slide. No?
Yes. No, I can't see. I can only
No.
see the first slide. So we need the second slide now.
I'm so sorry. Let me share again.
Nimra, I think, yeah, it's working now.
Okay.
It's working? All right.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So this is my second slide. So Avoidable Deaths Network, also known as ADN, is often misunderstood as an NGO. So we are not an NGO, not a trust, not a foundation, but a network that is based at the University of Leicester and Kansai University in Japan. And Leicester is based in the UK. We offer MSc in Risk, Crisis and Disaster Management. It's a distance learning executive program. We have an opening at the moment for the October intake. If there is any prospective MSc Risk, Crisis and Disaster Management student, please feel free to get in touch with me. Otherwise, we have a website. You can look up the course fees. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. We also offer PhD in management. So yeah, Kansai University offers BA, BSc in safety science, and they also offer PhD. So if you are interested in any of these programs, either at Leicester or Kansai, please feel free to get in touch with me or Hideyuki Shiroshita. So we can move on to the next one. Thank you. So a little bit about Avoidable Deaths Network. So Avoidable Deaths Network is a global, at the same time local, network dedicated to reducing human deaths from natural hazards, naturally triggered technological hazards, and human-made hazards in low and middle income countries. Having said that, we also focus in high income countries. For instance, we have, the ADN Japan chapter in Japan. I'm based in the UK, but otherwise our projects are going on in the global south. Why do we exist? To help policymakers and practitioners make better decisions to save lives and reduce injuries for sustainable development. And on the left-hand side, we have, got couple of questions. Number one, what are avoidable deaths? We used avoidable deaths network and avoidable deaths term continuously. So otherwise, in general, it means premature deaths. But otherwise, based on what ADN promotes, we understand avoidable deaths are of 3 types. Amenable deaths, which requires timely interventions to save amenable deaths. Second, preventable deaths, which requires preventable measures to reduce preventable deaths. And thirdly, we also understand avoidable deaths are also governance-related deaths. So for that, we promote risk governance, especially United Nations disaster risk governance measures to reduce governance-related deaths. Now, why avoidable deaths? It's partly because we believe that that's the way to promote social justice, inequality, and sustainable development. And also we believe in zero casualties because it is important that zero casualties is advocated and promoted wherever possible, because zero damage is not possible. And all these activities of ours, this idea of avoidable deaths and justice directly contributes to Sendai Framework's target A and B. So target A is about reducing disaster deaths substantially by 2030, and target B is about reducing the number of people affected by disasters by 2030. And these 2 Sendai Frameworks, target A and B, work in interface with 4 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, a couple of years ago, Avoidable Deaths Network became part of the Sendai Framework's voluntary commitments. So we have a website on the UNDRR page, and we provide report every 6 months. So you can follow up some of our activities that we do through that website as well. Why network? It's important. I think the challenges such as avoidable deaths are wicked. They cross-cut disciplines, actors, sectors at different levels. So it's a wicked problem, and we think that networking is a novel way to address those kind of wicked challenges, such as reducing avoidable deaths. And this networking brings a new insights to us and to others, partly because we understand that networking is basically everyone, whoever is here today, is sitting on a pile of knowledge. And this knowledge is often untapped. And this knowledge doesn't mean who are writing books, publishing papers, but general public have this knowledge of how to reduce deaths or reduce the number of people affected by disasters or promote resilience, sustainability, so on and so forth. So I think networking is primarily designed to engage with general public and get that knowledge, bring on board and help others. And finally, ADN, we are trying to promote that kind of an arena where people can communicate and interact with others to get new insights to reduce avoidable deaths with the aim of sustainable development. So ADN is a network, it's a global network, but also we set, wherever possible, we are trying to establish networks at local and national level. So we are currently experimenting 2 types of networks. One is called KEN, Knowledge Exchange Network, and this is partly for those who want to find yet unknown issues related to avoidable deaths. And at a local level, this is partly for high-risk groups. We call it Local Level Action Network. And this is designed for those who want to find solutions to known issues related to avoidable deaths. So we have been experimenting KEN in the Caribbean for the indirect disaster deaths, and now in India for snake bite deaths. And the Local Level Action Network, Hideyuki has been experimenting in Japan, in Izumiotsu, in the city of Osaka, and we will be experimenting land network in the state of Orissa, in our village called Burujhari in Orissa. So what do? We do quite a few things. So number one, on 12th of March, we launched a global campaign, which we call it International Awareness Day for Avoidable Deaths, or IAD for AD. And the aim of the IAD for AD is to raise the visibility of indirect deaths and missing persons, and also capture the causes and circumstances that lead to avoidable deaths. We have an ongoing project on snakebite deaths. We're trying to experiment and assess the feasibility of knowledge exchange network in the context of snakebite deaths. We have an ongoing project on drowning deaths, which will be starting. This is the second phase of drowning deaths, starting on 1st of August in 3 different countries, South Africa, Uganda, and Bangladesh. We have a long-lasting project on tsunami deaths. This is led by our junior champions in the city of Izumiotsu. It's been going on for nearly 10 years. Reducing women's and adolescents, girls' deaths during disasters from post-abortion complications is another long-lasting project. It's been going on for more than 8 years. Now the project has moved into prototyping phase. And finally, we also do knowledge exchange webinars and symposia. Now, I have highlighted knowledge exchange webinars because today's special session is part of this. So we try to bring experts, practitioners, and researchers to share their knowledge that they hold so that others can benefit. So we can move on to the next one. Okay, so our first knowledge exchange webinar was launched on 4th December 2020. It's nearly 3 years. Over these years, we have crossed countries, continents, different locations. So this is probably our 20th special session that we are launching. So I'm very grateful to all our esteemed speakers for accepting our invitation. And this special session we are, just facilitating. I think Sari and Eli has been doing an amazing job. This is led by Bridge Network. So yeah, I'm looking forward to learning and listening from our esteemed speakers. So we can move to the next one. Yes, so if you have not joined ADN, please do. So we have, as I said, website on UNDRR Center Voluntary Commitments, and you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. Our ADN team is very proactive in promoting the events and various other things of ADN. And also you can join ADN by just clicking this link. So I think one of my colleagues will drop this link on the chat box. It takes literally a second, maximum 3 seconds to join ADN. So please feel free to do that. And we can move on to the next one. Yeah, and thank you very much. So over to Sari. Thank you. Thank you for your patience as well.
Can you hear me?
Classic, I'm muted. Thank you, Nivedita. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I would like to introduce Dr. Julie Smith. She's an economist and an associate professor at the Australian National University. Her research focuses on the economic valuation of breastfeeding and the regulation of markets for mother's milk. Julie has published more than 45 peer-reviewed articles, chapters, and books on this topic. Julie has provided expert advice to the World Health Organization, the US Department of Health and Human Services, and the Australian Department of Health, and has actively involved with the international NGOs, including the UNICEF UK. She co-founded the World Breastfeeding Trends Initiative Australia, and previously served as board directors for the Australian Breastfeeding Association. Before joining the ANU, Julie had a senior economist position in the Australian and New Zealand Treasuries and the Parliamentary Research Service in Canberra. So it's very honored to have you, Julie, and thank you very much for your time, and the space and time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sari, and thank you to the organisers for this invitation to speak today. Our global systems for measuring the productive economy reflect misguided principles about what is important and what is valuable. It doesn't measure unpaid work, it doesn't measure the environment. So I hope from this webinar talk, you'll come to learn how the economic value of breastfeeding can be measured and calculated and why it isn't, and why addressing this gender inequity is important. Also to understand how measuring unpaid care and breastfeeding in the statistical system for GDP supports key advocacy and action on breastfeeding, and to recognise the human and planetary costs of not breastfeeding and the economic opportunity costs of mothers' investments in breastfeeding. So over 50 years ago, Alan Berg, World Bank nutritionist, remarked on the visible loss of countries of the world, but the crisis in infant feeding is a global one and it is ongoing. For Norway, but the same was happening around the world. I'll come back to this later. Globally, sales of formula are booming, driven by the collapse of breastfeeding in middle-income countries like China and Brazil, and led by nutritionally dubious toddler formula promotion, which exploits parents' anxieties and stresses, as well as greenwashing. The decline in breastfeeding is invisible in economic statistics, but it's got large economic implications. The system of national accounting was introduced in the 1950s as a standardised way of measuring gross domestic product, economic growth, as we know it. It became how economic performance and progress is measured, but it mainly only counts monetary transactions. Feminist economic research, starting particularly in New Zealand with Dame Professor Marilyn Waring, highlighted that some countries previously counted subsistence production and unpaid household production. But with the advent of accounting, this was taken out, and also they hide women's productivity. But they have shaped social norms and beliefs about what's important. GDP counts commercial milk formula, but not women's unpaid work. Statistics matter because they are the evidence on which policy is built. At present, measures of national economic output show a decline if more babies are breastfed and a rise if commercial baby foods displace breastfeeding. These are ridiculous results and severely undermine the public credibility of GDP estimates and other data. We don't see the ongoing losses of food production for infants and young children and their displacement by commercial products because mother's milk is not measured in our economic and accounting and performance measurement systems. If the value of breastfeeding and breast milk were more visible, greater funding priority comes from human milk production by increasing breastfeeding. When countries don't include human milk in their economic statistics, breastfeeding mothers' contribution to the economy and society and the importance of breastfeeding for mothers and babies and the food system generally goes unnoticed. The problem of systematically omitting breastfeeding mothers in human milk in national food balance sheets leads to further problems in terms of making a compelling investment case for action. Money is the language of policymakers. Policies and investments in the food system, if you're not measuring mother's milk and breastfeeding, investments will prioritise the protection, promotion and support for other producers, commercial producers, corporate producers, and their foods, including milk products from cows and commercial milk formulas for infants and toddlers. And this is likely to have a lower return to society and to the planet's health than breastfeeding. To improve the visibility of breastfeeding in economic statistics, together with Alive and Thrive Southeast Asia Pacific and other colleagues, including Alex, who's here, we developed the downloadable Mother's Milk tool. The tool is user-friendly and a downloadable version was launched last year. It's already online and we will have an online version in 2022. The tool is useful for many purposes and by a variety of users, as I'll describe in a minute. And it's the logical counterpart to the cost of not breastfeeding tool, which has been developed by Alive and Thrive to calculate the health system cost and the lives lost by not breastfeeding at country level. And it also complements the International Baby Food Action's costing tool, the World Breastfeeding Costing Initiative, for estimating the financing needs for breastfeeding, including maternity entitlements. Breastfeeding is not solely a woman's responsibility. It depends also on an enabling environment being provided by others. So the Mother's Milk tool can be used by health and food policy makers, food and nutrition security advocates, researchers, national accountants and economists for their decision-making and programming, as well as by mothers, families and their caregivers. The tool helps to quantify the volume and the monetary value of breastfeeding at national, regional and global levels. It can help measure the progress towards national and global breastfeeding targets, inform updating of national policies, programs and investment plans, and ensure greater investments and resources are allocated towards the protection, promotion and support of breastfeeding. At the individual level, it can also be used to help mothers' confidence and motivation about the value of what she does for her child. And I'm aware that it's being used for health professional training in some countries as well. More details about the tool are in this recent publication, which is open access, I should add. So here you'll see some snapshots from the tool. Key functions of the Mother's Milk tool in the offline version are it's for mothers and for countries. You can do either. It uses preloaded data, or you can use your own data on breastfeeding. Where there are gaps in breastfeeding data, we do our best using a prediction model to fill those gaps. And it provides an advocacy kit for people to use for advocacy in their own. We have an online version which has multiple languages available as well. So, for example, you can calculate within the tool these sort of estimates. 35.6 billion litres a year of milk is produced by the world's mothers, packaged sustainably and packaged along with nurturing care. The global monetary value of this breast milk production for infants and young children aged 0 to 36 months was around $3.6 trillion in 2020. So the price we use to measure that is the price of a not-for-profit milk banking network in Norway. But it gives you, and it's a lower minimum level price. So it gives you some idea of the immense value of this monetary value, which of course is not the only value. Every year, because women are not supported to breastfeed, the world loses around 21.9 billion litres of this perfect baby food because governments fail to invest in the support women need to keep breastfeeding. So production presently is only around 38% of potential production levels. Even at a monetary value of around $100 a litre, which I mentioned before, we're losing over $2.2 trillion a year of this uniquely valuable food. Ireland, which has one of the lowest breastfeeding rates in the world, competing, I think, with France, loses more than 80% of the potential production of milk that mothers could make if they were supported to breastfeed. If all women breastfed in Ireland, instead of producing 4.1 million litres of milk, they would be producing 24 million litres of milk each year for their babies. By contrast, in Nepal, the production of breast milk is around 221 million litres, and only 3.9% was lost on the most recent data that we had available to us. However, I have to add that breastfeeding rates are declining very rapidly in Nepal. I'll come back to the figures, but the situation has become quite dire in a country that was a strong breastfeeding country. Bottle feeding has doubled since 2016, with an increase to 30% since 2016. The tool provides greater policy visibility and awareness of the importance of breastfeeding to a country's food system and economy, and clearly it's very important in Nepal. As I showed above, we found that 220 million litres is estimated to be produced each year in Nepal, around 96% of its biologically feasible levels. The value of this production at current milk bank prices is around $22 billion a year. In 2020, GDP in Nepal, the whole of GDP, was $35 billion a year. So this milk would be well over half the value of GDP if Nepal needed to buy it instead of the generosity of mothers providing it. So I'm now going to talk briefly about the green feeding tool. There are three pillars of policy in responding to climate change. These are mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Breastfeeding and policies to support it address all three of these again, but invisibly. This work on infant and young child feeding in relation to the environment and climate change was initiated and led by global NGOs, such as the International Baby Food Action, who've produced their green feeding research and resources. And together with ANU, Alive and Thrive have now developed partnerships and collaborations to develop and launch our green feeding tool to complement the other tools that I mentioned. You can read more about the tools and the resources in the references below. In a paper that was published quite recently in 2022, scientists from Norway estimated the environmental impacts of infant formula comprehensively. And in particular, they found that estimated emissions over the infant formula product life cycle are around 226 to 288 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions. For that's first 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding. If they're not breastfed, that emissions is twice as high as from exclusive breastfeeding. And other environmental harms, of course, are significantly higher. As you can see here, this is another example of estimates from the tool. And the tool allows you to put in your own data, like for high-income countries like Australia, the data is not available on the internationally consistent basis. And you can put in your own data. And for countries like Indonesia, you can use the preloaded data and do counterfactual estimations in both cases. So you can say to yourself, what happens if breastfeeding stops in these countries? What happens if women's work is completely taken for granted and seen as unimportant? What will happen to greenhouse gas emissions, and what will happen to water use, which is very important. Increased paid maternity leave from 25 to 50 weeks. The result was an increase in exclusive breastfeeding of about 8 to 9 percentage points. So you can make a simple calculation. For example, that infants that are not exclusively breastfed to 6 months were fed exclusively on commercial milk formula. This simple calculation suggests that the paid maternity leave policy reduced Canada's greenhouse gas emissions by over 9 million carbon dioxide equivalent kilograms in 2008, simply by increasing exclusive breastfeeding. So this is an example of how the tool can be used. So I'm just going to talk briefly now about the opportunity cost, the time cost to women of breastfeeding, and how it's important that societies and governments co-invest with women, because women invest enormously in breastfeeding, and this is not counted in current economic and budgeting systems. Lack of societal investment in care work, including breastfeeding, is inequitable and costly to women and children, to health systems and to the environment. Breastfeeding and care work takes time, effort and skill, and it needs investment to be sustainable for women. Not investing costs women and children, and as we saw, the planet. And these investments by women in care need recognition and invisibility so that the necessary investments are made. Gender budgeting rests on recognising the unpaid economy and following the money from public budgets to see whether it's fairly decided and fairly allocated. Recent research has also shown that investing in breastfeeding is a good investment in planetary health. Investing in renewable energy returns less than investing in the global nutrition targets for breastfeeding. You can see the references here. The first is by IOF Long from Ireland. The biggest investment needed is in maternity protection, such as paid maternity leave and workplace breastfeeding support, including breastfeeding breaks. 500 million women around the world do not have adequate access to maternity protections for very basic women. It's over 100 member organisation. Its very first Congress organised a convention the government signed up to provide decent leave for women, and we still don't have it. Other key investments to support breastfeeding are in baby-friendly hospitals and the WHO Code implementation of marketing regulation to end exploitative marketing. Emergencies and disasters should be planned for to avoid the industry exploiting the promotion opportunities that occur when government and regulation is disrupted. Alex will be talking about that shortly. This year, the Lancet series on breastfeeding talked about the ecosystem of breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is a biocultural behaviour. It requires an enabling environment for women to maintain it. The recent Lancet series on breastfeeding shows how the ecosystem for breastfeeding has been eroded by commercial formula manufacturers targeting parents' anxieties and marketing to health professionals. The industry also uses its power for advocacy, targeting policymakers to prevent or delay investments in social protections, health system, and other investments in infrastructure that women need to juggle their care work with earning a living. So in conclusion, bold and wide-ranging action is needed to galvanise the necessary investments to protect this crucial global food resource. Making mother's milk visible in economic statistics and food balance sheets raises policy priority for protecting breastfeeding. We need to measure what matters and stop counting milk formula production as valuable while not counting breastfeeding at all. It thereby could progress economic well-being as well as greater equity in child health, gender and society, and sustainability. So I'd like to acknowledge here the team that helped develop the Mother's Milk tool with funding from FHI Solutions and the Australian Research Council, and also the team that developed the Green Feeding Action tool. So thank you very much for your attention, and thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. So we will, lots of thought-provoking, it's very thought-provoking. So if people want to also to drop questions in the chat box, but we will, Q&A will be at the end of the third presenter, yeah, or the presentation. So, okay, so I would like to introduce Alex Ilamo. He is a senior emergency nutrition advisor at the Family Health International 360. Welcome, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us. And Alex has an extensive expertise in nutrition and infant and young child feeding, policies and practice, particularly in emergencies. And the WHO International Code Baby-Friendly Hospital and the operational guidance for infant and young child feeding. Again, it's an emergency. And Alex has worked with the WHO Scientific and Technical Advisory Group on the International Code and assisted the International Baby Food Action Network with the development of World Breastfeeding Trend Initiative. We welcome you, Alex, and the time and space is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a second. Thank you, Sari and team, for the invitation. And yeah, and thanks again, Julie. Always very inspiring. It's never some old news from Julie. There is always something to think and to keep reflecting on. So yeah, the topic is infant and young child feeding in emergencies and some linkage with gender responsive budgets or budget. The first few slides are just to frame a bit what we are trying to discuss here, what we are trying to reflect on all together. So I'm sharing some images of emergencies around the world, and I hope they are not too strong or they don't create any issue among the people around the call. But the main message around these images are, few. And I will share with them my thoughts in a second. So in general, and this is based on my experience, but I'm sure there are colleagues around this table, around this call that have similar experiences. What we know, what we're seeing, what we are documenting every time we engage in an emergency is women and children are generally amongst the most affected in the emergencies. And two, that emergency strikes everywhere, low income, middle income, high income countries. We have more and more experiences. And of course, for example, Julie comes from a country like Australia that unfortunately recurrently experience emergencies. I heard colleagues from Japan. We have colleagues from the US, Canada, Italy. This is a picture from Italy, earthquake. So again, so women and children are among the most affected populations, and emergency strikes everywhere. So it's not an issue, or it's not a problem of low-income countries, but it's a problem of every woman and every child that is affected by an emergency. That came out from WHO and UNICEF in 2002, and these were endorsed by all member states of the United Nations. So the desire, the global, the collective desire is for women around the world, again, in any context and at all times. So all women around the world, in any context at all time, to be able to initiate breastfeeding, to be able to exclusively breastfeed their infants, and hopefully to continue breastfeeding up to 2 years or beyond. And again, we have volumes and volumes of evidence that have supported those recommendations. From a mortality point of view, we have seen, the Lancet 2016, that even more than 800,000 under 5 deaths could be prevented by breastfeeding, and by breastfeeding alone, by increasing, by improving the breastfeeding rates. At the same time, we've seen, and again, there are volume of evidence, how breastfeeding is really important as well as to prevent deaths caused by breast cancer, and improving breastfeeding, improving the current breastfeeding rates can help prevent additional 20,000 deaths from the one that are already being prevented using the current baseline. So again, very important contribution of breastfeeding if we are able to improve and increase breastfeeding practices, both in relation to child mortality and to women's, to maternal deaths due to breast cancer in particular. And we have seen a growing body of evidence around the economic impact of improving breastfeeding across contexts. And we have seen how this economic impact is very, very relevant, as I was mentioning, in high-income countries. So countries maybe where we are coming from, or other countries in the middle or low-income strata. So we know all of this evidence. And again, Julie earlier on presented additional evidence of the importance of breastfeeding and the importance of supporting breastfeeding across contexts. But what about what about emergency? What about the situation in our emergency context? What is happening and what has happened so far? Let's start from some of the challenges. And this is a slide I borrowed from Julie for another presentation, but I felt it was very relevant for this conversation as well. Well, a consistent challenge that we experience in our emergency responses in relation to breastfeeding is the marketing of breast milk substitutes, and how the marketing during emergencies does affect our ability to protect and promote and support infant feeding also during an emergency context. And we are seeing it with the enormous amounts of infant formula being donated, for example, during emergencies, and the attempts of the industry to promote products even during an emergency response. Based on our experience, we have been documenting other type of challenges, no? And I'm just trying to summarize what we have seen across contexts, no? So in general, unfortunately, we experience lack of support, lack of resources, lack of attention within our emergency response activities to support breastfeeding or to support other infant feeding interventions like complementary feeding. And this is very evident when wasting or acute malnutrition is not seen as a problem. So in contexts where we don't experience high levels of acute malnutrition, then the donor community, the governments do not consider those contexts having any nutrition issues. So they ignore or neglect the importance of breastfeeding support and the importance of maternal nutrition support for that case. The second, as I was mentioning earlier, linked to the breast milk substitutes marketing, is really the widespread donations of products. Donations that are not controlled, are not done according to standards, and we will not hear, but we will be able to see what mothers have to say about those donations. But we regularly, systematically see a huge, enormous amount of products being donated, and donated also to women that don't want it or don't need it, and donated without any form of, any access to clean water, or donated with any utensils or any other preparatory tools or utensil that may be needed to ensure the safe preparation of those products in environments that are very challenged from a sanitation point of view, from an hygienic point of view. Another major challenge we keep documenting, but doesn't get much attention or the resources needed to be able to address it, is that displacement caused by an emergency, the insecurity caused by an emergency do add stress, fear, and these are situations, these are feelings, these are perceptions that unfortunately impact the ability of women to care and to nurture their own children in a situation of an emergency. And I reiterate how companies unfortunately exploit those emergency conditions to market their products during emergencies, and we have been seeing how they did it during the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the biggest, if not the biggest emergency we have ever seen and dealt with. On the donation side, we don't have really a large amount of peer-reviewed evidence, but we see, we have substantial evidence to show why we are very concerned on donating products without a controlled mechanism, without trained professionals, without the support that women and children may need, if ever the product is really necessary. And just a disclaimer: we are not denying that in certain contexts, in certain situations, infant formula is necessary, but we are reiterating the importance of providing this product under a very controlled environment and providing all the needed support so that the product is not going to, affect the family, like in the case of Indonesia, where families that receive infant formula eventually experience a large number of diarrhea cases because of the inappropriate type of donations and the lack of access to safe water and so on and so forth. I wanted to share with you some real experiences from a current, not one of the current emergencies where we are working, and this is the Ukraine conflict, where we did really ask women to tell us what type of support are they receiving in relation to infant feeding. And look at some of the quotes, and a full article is coming out, is being published, and Julie as well is one of the co-authors of this article. See these quotes really that tells us or confirms what we've been unfortunately documenting emergency after emergencies. So a mother said at the onset of the conflict in March, April, all pharmacies were closed and there was no humanitarian aid. I had to find an old woman with a cow and gave cow's milk to my baby. She had a newborn, a child that was very young in his age, below 1 year of age. Another mother said, humanitarian aid provided infant formula. I refused. The mother was refusing it, but they said that she had to take it. So again, the type of support provided, it's mainly reflected in widespread donation of formula without any form of support. Another mother was saying, and then the hostilities became more active, and they were closer to our place. Shelling and explosions came every 5 or 10 minutes. My mental health got worse. I was constantly nervous. And that's why my milk supply dropped. And that's what she was feeling, that she was not able to breastfeed, or she was not able to breastfeed properly because of that stressful situation. Certainly, the war did affect the situation. My breast milk production was not sufficient to feed the child. And let's also listen, again, we're not listening, but let's also see how practitioners on the ground, still from the Ukraine conflict, and again, we could bring many more experiences. I know there are documented experiences from Australia, and we are now publishing another experience from the Turkey-Syria earthquake. But look at what these lactation consultants, these lactation counselors from Ukraine saw, the level of support that women affected by the conflict are receiving during the, unfortunately, the ongoing conflict. UNICEF spaces do not provide any infant prenatal feeding support. Women are not getting any infant feeding support besides what they were doing as lactation counselors. Most women now don't breastfeed because there is no support. Nobody supports breastfeeding. So it's a reiteration of this lack of support to women with young children in a conflict situation. Today, more than before, women lack support, and the biggest challenges are infant formula donations, and that nobody is supporting breastfeeding women. A lot of formula arrived in Ukraine, is available and continues to be available everywhere. But what can we do? And again, that's just a snapshot of something, and I want to repeat something that and I am sad to acknowledge, keep seeing and we keep documenting, but we are not able to change. What can we do? Well, we certainly don't lack guidance. We certainly don't lack standards, and these are some of the standards, of the guidance, of the protocol that are globally available and globally endorsed, meaning by the UN member states. So countries like my country, Italy, like country like Australia, endorsed, or New Zealand for that, or Pakistan, endorsed this guidance, endorsed those commitments. But if we look at where we are, again, from a recent global nutrition policy review conducted by WHO, out of 162 countries that responded to that exercise, that participated in that exercise, only 26%, 1/4 of those countries said that there's some form of policy that relates to infant feeding in emergencies. So we are really lagging behind on national guidance, national protocols, national guidelines on what to do, how to support infant feeding in an emergency, domestic emergency, or with an international dimension. And so again, only 38 countries out of those 162 mention some form of protocols. In general, these are protocols related to counseling, but very few have protocols about establishing safe spaces for breastfeeding, and a bit more have some protocols in relation to conducting needs assessments for infant financial feeding or controlling breast milk substitutes. So we are really lagging behind on how to respond to how to support women in emergencies in relation to their infant feeding needs. So in conclusion, I think I'm very confident. I think we can all say that there is no question that promoting or protecting and supporting infant financial feeding, breastfeeding in particular, is a life-saving intervention. But despite all the evidence, infant financial feeding is rarely systematically supported and resourced. And again, in one of the largest humanitarian response, the current Ukraine conflict, one of the largest and the most funded humanitarian response, donors said, no, we don't see this as a problem. This is not a problem according to them. No. We can also say that there is still very limited or no capacity in many countries to support infant financial feeding. And this is why we are not able to respond to the needs of these women. The women we are able to, we document their experience in Ukraine, or the women we are documenting their experience in Australia, or the women we are documenting their experience in after the Turkey-Syria conflict, earthquake, or the Syrian conflict, and so on and so forth. As you have seen, we are really lagging behind. We don't have plans, we don't have policies. We have very limited plans or policies, and certainly budgets that recognize the needs of women and their infants as part of the emergency response. And once again, infant formula donations are widespread, are across every emergency, and we face serious challenges in preventing them and or controlling the same. So thank you so much for the time and the opportunity to be here, and very happy to answer any question as it may be coming up from the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. It's very insightful presentation. Thank you for your time and sharing with us this eye-opening, very new topic for many of us on infant and child feeding practices and emergencies and policy. And it's a wicked problem, isn't it? So the question and the Q&A will be at the end of the presentation. But if people would like to start writing their questions, you're welcome to do it in the chat. Okay, for the next one, the next presentation, we have Andini Pramono. Welcome, Andini. Selamat sore. So Andini Pramono is an international board certified lactation consultant. And you will graduate with your doctoral degree from the Australian National University next week. So our congratulations to you, Andini. So your PhD, Andini PhD research centers around the facilitators and barriers to implementing the baby-friendly hospital initiative in Indonesia and Australia. So in the past 10 years or more than 10 years, Andini actively contributes to the Indonesian Breastfeeding Mothers Association, Australian Breastfeeding Association, and the World Breastfeeding Trend Initiative Australia. So your presentation will be looking into baby-friendly hospital, comparing Indonesia and Australia. Welcome, Andini. The time and place is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sari. I will share my screen now. Can you hear my voice? Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, perfect. I will share my screen now. Can you see my screen now? I think, yeah, okay, perfect.
Thank you.
I will start my timer as well. So, okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak in this webinar. I'm going to share one part of my PhD research, social value of baby-friendly hospital initiative in Australia and Indonesia. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owner of the land on which I present today, Manawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. I have no conflict of interest to declare. Picture and photos that I use in this presentation are for educational purpose only. As we all know, the first few hours and days of a newborn's life is a critical period to establish lactation and provide mothers with the support they need to breastfeed successfully. Data from UNICEF showed that 78% of deliveries were attended by a skilled health provider, but only 45% of newborns were breastfed within the first hour after birth. Health professionals may perform inappropriate procedures that interfere with the initiation of breastfeeding, such as separation of the mother and infant, delayed initiation of breastfeeding, provision of prelactial feeds, and unnecessary supplementation. These procedures increase the risk of breastfeeding challenges that lead to early cessation. Now I want to go backward a bit. Why the first few days after birth is critical? Breast milk that comes out on day 1 until day 3, which is called colostrum, only comes out in small amount and it will gradually increase.
Adini,
It is, yeah, sorry.
Adini, I'm so sorry. Can we expand your slide, please? Because it's not legible. Is it possible? So maybe put this show view, maybe?
Oh.
Yes, please, because it's not legible, the letters and things. So just try. Don't worry about the time. Take a few seconds. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can ask Nimra to share.
I'm not sure why it's not. Is this this
or
one?
could we have
Not
Nimra to share,
No.
please?
Probably
You
I'll
can
try this one.
Again,
yes, that's better. Thank you.
Is it okay now?
Good, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because sorry.
It's all right. I think, Julie, are you okay with this?
Yes, it's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Because
Thank
I'm
you.
using 2 screens here, so I'm sometimes a bit confused. Okay, I'll continue with this one. Yeah, so it is the amount of the colostrum is adjusting to the newborn stomach, as you can see in the right picture. And this sometimes are being misunderstood as lack of breast milk. And at this situation, then mothers might be suggested to supplement with formula during the hospital stay. Brief explanation on how breast milk is produced. Every time a baby suckles to their mother, it triggers a nerve in the nipple and areola, which sends an impulse to the brain, and then the brain releases the hormones into the bloodstream. So the more a baby suckle, the more a mother produces breast milk. Therefore, breastfeeding support during hospital stay, usually 2 or 3 days, is really important and critical to establish breastfeeding journey. So the WHO launched the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding in 1989 to ensure every mother and baby receive adequate breastfeeding support and education regardless their background. And then the 10 steps embedded to the BFHI program in 1991. And also in 2018, the 10 steps was revised. But I would like to emphasize the difference between the two that I would use during this presentation. So the 10 steps is the policy framework, while the BFHI is the name of the program in which hospitals implement the 10 steps and then undergo an external assessment. And then this hospital will be awarded baby-friendly status. So I would like to refresh you with the 1989 10 steps. It's here for you to read it in your time. And then this one is the 2018 10 steps. So we can see there a major change made by WHO is subdividing the 10 steps into 2 subgroups. The first one is critical management procedures, and the second one is key clinical practices. The changes is actually subtle, but it is important for implementation. The focus moves from providing information to mothers only to educating and enabling mothers and their families. The focus for healthcare staff shifts from providing education to ensuring knowledge, competence, skills, and monitoring implementation into practice. And the focus also shifted the responsibility for some elements of care from hospitals to the community. Why are PFHI and 10 steps important? So there are lots of studies that show the positive association between PFHI and breastfeeding prevalence. But I just show you here the large studies. The one large cluster randomized trial in Republic of Belarus found that infants from sites receiving an experimental intervention of the PFHI model were 7 times more likely to be exclusively breastfed at 4 months. Another study in Scotland found that babies born in PFHI hospital were 28% more likely to be exclusively breastfed at 7 days postnatal. And one study in Hong Kong found that after implementing a policy of paying market price for infant formula in public hospitals, there was a significant decrease of in-hospital supplementation of breastfeeding babies, a decrease in the overall rate of premature breastfeeding cessation, and an increase in the median duration of breastfeeding. But the data in 2017, unfortunately, only 10% of babies were born in PFHI hospital globally. Now we're going to look into the implementation in Australia and Indonesia. The first one is I'm going to talk about PFHI in Australia. So UNICEF passed governance of PFHI within Australia to the Australian College of Midwives in 1995, where it remains today. And in 2006 in Australia, the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative became the Baby Friendly Health Initiative in order to more accurately reflect the expansion of the initiative into community health facilities. But the latest data show that only 26% of all Australian hospitals designated as baby friendly. Now, 10 steps Indonesia. In Indonesia, the Ministry of Health implemented a program called Mother and Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative in 2009, which despite its name was quite different from PFHI. This initiative aimed to reduce maternal postpartum mortality rather than to improve breastfeeding success. And there is no specific program currently to promote the PFHI in Indonesia, despite some research referring to the PFHI in Indonesian setting. What they actually meant was the implementation of the 10 steps. So I'm just going to show you this figure to describe how the PFHI and 10 steps connect to Indonesian regulation. So in the left box, PFHI refers to the implementation of the 10 steps and external assessment that is conducted regularly every 3 until 5 years. The 1989 10 steps was adopted verbatim to the Indonesian government regulation. And then step 4 and 6 were included in the National Hospital Accreditation Standard. Step 1 and 10 were included in the Indonesian Mother and Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative, which I mentioned in the previous slides. However, the 2018 10 steps hasn't been adopted yet. And we don't have the PFHI accreditation program at the moment. Now we're looking at the studies of PFHI and 10 steps implementation in Australia and Indonesia. There are several Australian studies describing barriers to PFHI and 10 steps implementation and or accreditation, which are similar to those reported in the international literature. Most studies examined midwives' perspective and agree that the PFHI and 10 steps have positive impacts on breastfeeding duration. While for Indonesia, unfortunately, only few studies examining 10 steps implementation. But in those few studies, they mention about barriers that includes a lack of breastfeeding education and knowledge of hospital staff, influence of infant formula manufacturers, and hospital infrastructure and regulation. Many benefits of breastfeeding are intangible and long-term, and understanding short-term economic benefits provides tangible evidence and potential incentives for health services and policymakers. There is an increasing interest of research studying the benefit of breastfeeding and cost of not breastfeeding in economic terms. Some of these have been explained by Alex, so I won't repeat this again. And this also studies from Australia, Southeast Asian countries, and also Indonesia. Some studies also have calculated the social value of breastfeeding program with the aim of incentivizing governments and other stakeholders to invest more in breastfeeding. For example, this study from Nairobi and also in Ireland. Now, just brief description about the framework that I use to calculate the social value. So I use the social return on investment, or SROI. It is a framework that measures and accounts for the broader value of breastfeeding. Because the benefits of breastfeeding are associated with a wide range of outcomes, including health and social benefits. Therefore, this methodology was relevant to help understand the value created by these programs to inform policymaking. This is a structured questionnaire that we developed to use for our interview in my case studies. This is based on the 2018 10 steps. So now into the Australian case study. So for this one, the study was conducted in Calvary Public Hospital, Canberra in August 2019. We selected this hospital because this hospital has been baby-friendly accredited for 15 years. And the data that we collected was analyzed in Excel using SRI framework, which uses monetary values to measure social, environmental, and economic outcomes of change. The information obtained in the interviews was supplemented with evidence-based estimation from recent high-quality studies that measured the health and cost-saving benefits of breastfeeding. This is the hospital, Calvary Public Hospital. So it was established in 1979. It also has rooming-in facility. So for babies that needs medical treatment after birth, so the mother or the parents can stay in the hospital to continue breastfeed or maintaining their breast milk production. The average number of births in this hospital was 1,000 annually, with exclusive breastfeeding rate on discharge of 97% in 2019. So after the calculation, our study found that every $1 Australian invested in maintaining BFHI accreditation by this hospital generated approximately 55 Australian dollar of benefit, or around $37 US. Now for the Indonesian case study. So for this case study, it was conducted in Airlangga University Hospital, Surabaya. It is a government hospital that has been implementing the 10 steps since 2012. We followed the same methods as the Australian case study, and the data was collected in January 2020. Briefly description about this hospital. It was established in 2012 by the Airlangga University and local government as a teaching hospital. Airlangga is a referral hospital under the Indonesian National Health Insurance System, which means that mothers usually do antenatal checkup at their local maternity services and then referred to Airlangga Hospital to give birth. Yeah, this hospital has been implementing the 10 steps since its establishment. And the average number of births in this hospital was 3,600 annually, with exclusive breastfeeding rate on discharge of 80% in 2019. After the calculation, we found that every $1 invested in this hospital could be expected to generate approximately $49 of benefit. However, there are limitations for these case studies. Both case studies measured the benefits compared to the cost invested by the hospital. Nevertheless, our study did not include cost saving for healthcare providers, which were not taken into account due to large gaps in the literature relevant to the Australian and Indonesian health system. There is no literature on the benefits to healthcare professionals in implementing the 10 steps and or achieving the PHI accreditation. Moreover, mother's time and effort to breastfeed were not included in the calculation, with only limited data on this important investment available in the current literature. So in summary, social value of PHI and 10 steps are greater than the investment. And this case study provides novel evidence of breastfeeding as a public health tool, demonstrating the value of the investment in terms of social impact for mothers, babies, families, communities, and countries. Breastfeeding has the potential to help address inequity throughout the lifetime by providing the equal best start to all infants, regardless of their background. And also, I would like to re-emphasize the WHO recommendation on the integration of breastfeeding knowledge into the national curriculum standard for health students. And this program also will need government commitment and prioritization, as well as multi-sectoral collaboration. Both case studies have been published in 2021, and you can scan the QR code to download and read the full paper. Thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Andini. Thank you very much. So have put some questions already, and I can see some people have questions already in the chat. So it's very insightful and a good in a way that you also include some case studies and comparison between Indonesia and Australia. And I'm certain there's will be lots of questions. We have lots of colleagues here from Indonesia as well. Okay, so now we are coming to the Q&A. I would like to welcome